Today, the then World Wrestling Federation staged SummerSlam 1992 from Wembley Stadium in London, England, featuring a very famous match between Bret Hart and Davey Boy Smith, the British Bulldog, that saw the Bulldog win the Intercontinental Championship, and within months, Bret Hart was WWF champion and Bulldog was gone from the company. Here to discuss this very noteworthy event and match is the author of Dynamite and Davey, The Explosive Lives of the British Bulldogs, returning to post-wrestling. Stephen Bell is with us. Stephen, how are you today?
I'm great, John. Thanks for having me. Brilliant sort of occasion. It seems to have come around really quick, this anniversary. I remember thinking it was sort of 4 to 6 months after the sort of release of the book and thinking it was almost perfectly apt. But it's obviously been a bit of a roller coaster since then with the release of the book, and it just seems to have come around in no time. So, happy to discuss it here with you.
Yeah, I think you and I are kind of like in the similar age bracket where now we are getting to the point where events that we can remember pretty clearly happened 3 decades ago.
Yeah. I've noticed that with it's amazing. Obviously, wrestling podcasts are so popular at the minute, and it feels like they're doing these 20. It feels like they're doing a 25-year rolling. Some of them where they're reviewing 25 years back. So only the other week it was Canadian Stampede, which I'd obviously done so much research into for this book. I mean, 25 years. And then the week, not long after that, it's suddenly going to be Survivor Series 97. And you're like, wow, where is the time going? So yeah, I'm very much feeling that at the minute myself.
Take us back, just your own perspective. Where are you at this point? Did you attend this show? And tell me just a little bit about your fandom as it relates to that year's SummerSlam.
Didn't attend the show. I was 7 years old at the time. Didn't attend the show. I remember it vividly being just everywhere you looked on Sky Sports News. Never had Sky Sports News off. I was watching wrestling all the time. And when it wasn't wrestling or trying to watch as Premier League football, Premier League had just been incepted at that time in 1992. And Sky Sports was just pumping all the money into either WWF or Premier League football, soccer. And so even the advertisements when you're watching the Premier League soccer was for WWF stuff. And that's what Vince saw coming. He saw the popularity in the lead up to this. As you probably know, the original plan for SummerSlam 92 was Washington, D.C., probably with Shawn Michaels going against Bret in a ladder match. That's what the general consensus seems to be. But it was this amazing whirlwind of popularity, and Sky Sports funding it and broadcasting it over here in the UK. Really took it to that next level of mainstream popularity. Davey being such a huge flag bearer for that, and that's what changed the old dynamic then for what SummerSlam 92 was going to be. So I remember it just being everywhere, and it continued to be. It was then the blueprint that the partnership between WWF and Sky Sports used. Let's get over there. Let's put Davey in front of everybody and really keep that roller coaster going, and it worked.
And just before we dive into the event itself, just to contrast, what was WCW's coverage like at this point? And are you following it a lot at this point, or is it mainly through WWF that you are?
I remember, and it's funny you should say that, I remember I knew that WCW existed only through... I wanted magazines at the time. I remember what magazines. So there'd be magazines with coverage in. I remember Sting being all over magazines. Obviously, the really colourful, vibrant Sting at that time, babyface Sting, and action figures. I remember, but I personally never knew if I did have access. I've heard now during my research, I've stumbled across that you could get it on some bespoke channels. Through cable TV in the middle of the night kind of thing if you really went looking for it. But at 7-year-old, I wasn't doing that. So I knew that WCW was a thing, but Vince and the WWF had just completely sort of swamped the mainstream side of things.
Yeah, it was very similar for me, like growing up in Toronto, in Canada, in that you had access to get WCW, but I didn't have a cable package with TBS, and it was largely WWF that had the superior distribution. And in terms of live events, it was like even through the rise of WCW in the 90s, like Toronto was always a very strong market for for the WWF. And I think that for many that came up in the 80s and 90s, like WCW, like you could find it, but it was a bit tougher to access than it was WWF, which was just
Absolutely.
had a lot of roots here. Now, in terms of this event, this is one that it comes up so often when I hear from people in the UK that this was a jumping on point for them, that there are fond memories of this event. And it's one that I always look at, that this event, you can view it in terms of just the business it did that day at Wembley Stadium, but the long-term effect, it just feels like it really was putting your flag in this market and making a fan base that I think it was a really sizable event that created fans for decades to come.
Yeah, and I think they could have accomplished that sort of no matter what. At that time, I think they could have put on a mainstream event here, and they could have accomplished some of that. I think that event at that time, with that main event and that storyline at Wembley Stadium of all places, and filling the night sky with the fireworks at the end, there's just certain things that just seem like, I mean, the booking, if they did go to that level of degree of timing and things, like to start it off in the glorious sunshine. English weather is not reliable, to say the least. They get this glorious sunshine to start. The ring is bathed in beautiful sunshine, and you've got these sort of, and they're just sort of bog standard matches to start with. The tag matches that get things going. But then, as the sun sets and you get this unbelievable, beautiful purple sky, the Undertaker comes out. Then sort of to give these fans who'd had been starved of a mainstream live wrestling event for so long, to give them that moment, I think was amazing. Like, again, it's probably some luck as well as some judgment involved in the time and that and everything. But then the main event just sort of swamps everything else. And the way that they pulled it off, I think the long-term effects of that, creating that moment, I think that was a jumping on moment, as you've put it, for a lot of kids. Obviously, the WWF was marketing towards kids, especially at that time. But I think also the way that story was told, the way that the match panned out, I think you'd have had a lot of new fans, no matter what. Even dads watching it with the kids would suddenly go, wow, what have I just seen? The athleticism, the story. And so, yeah, I think that longevity directly led to so much mainstream popularity, not just for the WWF, not just for Davey Boy, not just for Bret, but for wrestling as a whole. And you saw a second wave after we'd lost the World of Sport era, sort of 5 years earlier, that had been completely killed off after such a iconic run of 30 years of primetime TV. That had died off, and it looked like British wrestling were done. It was going to be completely handed over to Vince. The side effect of that was it got so popular that it was suddenly an option for young athletic lads again. And that's why, and girls obviously as well, coming through the ranks. And that's why, as the years went on, then we saw your likes of Sheamus, Drew, Paige, Wade Barrett. You saw all these, almost every single one of them as named either that event or Davey specifically as such an inspiration. So I don't really think you can understate the long-term effect that the event had.
Yeah, and you kind of put it into context as well. Just some of the, just breaking from tradition that the company did. Like, here is something that, even at the time, like, taping this 2 days before it would air on pay-per-view, deciding to go with your Intercontinental title match on last. I mean, they made like some bold choices, like directly as a result of the market they were in, but really informing you of like the decade that was ahead, that you're seeing this transitional period in 1992, and Bret Hart is going to be your future, and you're sort of seeing, your Ultimate Warrior and Randy Savage sort of being phased down, and this is kind of that cross point.
Yeah, I think it's very serendipitous like that. Again, probably a little bit more by luck than judgment, but you can definitely see why they made the decision to go with that as the main event. Bret says in his book, and it's something that I repeat in mine, that he sells it to Vince as nobody's going to be able to follow us. He knows that because they had an all babyface match almost exactly 10 years before, when they were wrestling in Stampede. It was just a timing when neither of them had anything on. Bret was the North American heavyweight champion at that time. Neither of them had anything to do with this particular show. Quite a small show, and they just decided for the first time they would wrestle each other in singles match. And they were both baby faces, but they'd grown to have a really close friendship at the time. So they worked out an all babyface match that they think they could do and would go over well. And they pulled it off amazingly well. Obviously, both very young at the time. And so I think that had always stuck in Bret's mind in particular, that they could do that. And so I think when the stars aligned for this event, he knew what they could accomplish together in that ring. And that's how he sold it to Vince, that they're not going to be able to follow us. And I just think when you take into account the storyline that they developed with Diana involved, and it could never have been anything but the main event. And I think as well as being such an iconic event and so important for the British side of things, I also think it could be argued that this is where the new generation, as it became known, really started. As you say, it was the passing of the torch in many ways. These guys showed that they could do it, and they were ready, willing, and able to take over.
Can you tell us a little bit about Davey Boy's year in 1992 leading up to this match? Because it's quite interesting when you look at his role. Like he's advertised for WrestleMania, but the match with Berserker doesn't even happen, and it's quite the lead up here to this match at SummerSlam. Which again, this was only the beginning of June they announced that the show is going to be at Wembley as opposed to Washington.
Yeah, the timeline's really amazing when you look at it. I mean. So Davey has had a really strong 91, getting pushed solid as a singles for the first time after coming back, following obviously the exit of the Bulldogs a couple of years before. And it's Royal Rumble 92, which obviously was won by Flair. Davey had a really strong showing, which I think was obviously designed to continue that push. He enters at number 1. Lasts a long time, gets eliminated by Flair, the eventual winner. I always think that sort of counts for something in a way. And so there were no reason at that point to not think that everything were just going to carry on going, and they were going to continue with this push. As you say, the match with Berserker at WrestleMania doesn't end up happening. I think largely out of Davey's pride, led to believe that he was offered the chance to do a bit of a squash match, but didn't want to do that on that stage, thought it was cheap. And so, you could argue that things started to look slightly down for him, and then it got worse. In April, he had a failed drugs test, which was unfortunate timing, because it was just when the heat were really on Vince and the WWF that they had to clamp down on the drug side of things. So a failed drugs test was a 6-week suspension, no matter what. And so I've obviously got a lot more details about that in the book, exactly what it got failed on and what Davey says happened. But then he returned. They wanted to continue his push, so they need to do it in a big way. He returned on the 1st of June. As you say, around that time, there's just been this muted story that they might be going to Wembley, and it might be Davey that's getting the big push there. But he hasn't been in the ring for 6 weeks. He returns to the ring on the 1st of June, wins a 40-man battle royal, so that's like putting Davey straight back in the picture. But after the 6 weeks off, he's not quite in the same physical shape. He's having really short matches, a lot of them squash matches on house shows, wrestling Repo Man a lot, and your lower mid-carders, just to sort of keep him ticking along. And then at the end of July, he blew out a knee. He'd wrestled Iron Mike Sharp, blew out a knee, but his painkiller intake at that time had really stepped up because of the knock-on effect of all the mounting injuries. His back and his knees were shot already at that point. People forget that just how young Davey was when he started getting these injuries. And so that sort of masked it for a little while, but then it got infected. He ended up having a 6-week layoff with a knee injury, and it was touch and go as to whether or not he were going to be able to make it back for SummerSlam. So SummerSlam was actually his first match back after that 6-week injury layoff. Signs of the infection were still there. He was still in a lot of pain. But if you take into account the 6-week suspension before that, he'd only, for over the last 4 or 5 months, he'd wrestled very little. And there were short matches sort of easing him back in before the injury took effect again. So And yeah, I think a lot of people know the story that Bret tells in the book. Davey living in Florida at the time with Jim the Anvil Neidhart, and there's rumors that it was his preparation wasn't the best, to say the least, and Bret was taking it so seriously. But the way I tell it in the book is that you can almost see it. I think you can see it once I know the story myself after doing so much research, talking to so many people, reading so much. I think there's a point in the walk. I think he looks really nervous in his promo, Davey, when you look. And I think he is nervous. I mean, that's the biggest match of his life. It's 80,000 people. He's come home. He's the star. It's his homecoming. He spent such little time in the ring. I think there's a moment Lennox Lewis is walking off in front of him. He sort of punches the air and does this big intake of breath. And I don't know if you just sort of see something sort of wash over him a little bit. He realizes that, he's done this a million times before. It's just, he can just treat it as another match. So then I think if you overanalyze the match, you could maybe argue that he missed a couple of spots. I know that that's always been something that's been muted, that he gasses early and Bret carries him in a way. I know that that's something that's been said, but I think that's a little bit unfair. It takes two to tango, and it's one of the greatest matches of all time. So many people agree, be that because of the setting, be that because of the storyline, all that's involved. But I think they pull it off immaculately on the night. And I think given Davey's preparation, some of it self-inflicted, but also so much of it just really bad luck and bad timing, I think it's an amazing performance by him on the night, to be fair.
Yeah, it's one that you go into it pretty extensively in your book, but yeah, like Davey Boy's, he's 29, and you're realizing that even like this guy hasn't even reached his 30s yet, and he's dealing with a lot of physical ailments. You're hearing about the prescription drug use, the recreational drug use, and now you have the largest spotlight of your career. Like many people will point to this as maybe the highest point of Davey Boy's career. And it's coming in with all of these circumstances and going 25 plus minutes with Bret on top of it. Like you really get a sense of like the 90s for Davey Boy, many highs, many lows, as we spoke about earlier this year when we had you on.
But what I think's so great about that, John, is for me, storytelling and people's lives are told in certain ways. I'm a sucker for a big redemption story, and Davey has so many of them throughout his life and his career.
Yeah.
He gets written off so often, and I detail them in the book. The car crash that could have ended his life and career, various suspensions, injuries, and then ultimately in '99 when he gets written off, I think he's probably going to end up in a wheelchair. Even Meltzer writes that his career is definitely over. That's that. And 6 or 12 months later, his main event in a pay-per-view for the WWF. These redemption stories for Davey show a certain character within him that I don't think can be understated. But the problem is if you don't tell the story of the depths of that roller coaster, the low points of that roller coaster, you're doing him a disservice because you don't get the full reflective story of the gutsy personality that he must have had to always overcome that and reach those high points again that he repeatedly did. And so that is why I tried to tell the sort of full story. I did omit some things that were on an earlier draft because I got a bit of a challenge on them as to whether or not they were true or not. And I thought rather than go down those, rather than be overly controversial about just how low Davey got at that point, I chose to omit a couple of things. But ultimately, I think the more things that you take away from him, because it's not like there's anything overly negative. I mean, the time and the era and the lifestyle would suggest that those things were going on anyway. So I don't think it's overly stepping the mark to suggest that there might have been some painkiller and even, as you say, recreational drug use going on. But I think a lot of that was born out of the pain. I think that's what another thing that gets overlooked. The lifestyle, it was almost, I think there's a lot of peer pressure going on, and I intimate around that in the book too. It's often been said that Davey was slightly more of a follower than a leader, I think. And so I don't think that saying that somebody was taking painkillers or drinking or whatever around that time is sort of painting them in a bad light. It was just explaining where they were at that time of their career. Nerves were playing a part, pain and injuries were playing a part. So I think, as I say, for that redemptive story, for him to come in on that night, having had that preparation that he did, and to pull that performance out of the bag, for me, that's the way the story should be told.
You know, in kind of studying this time period and Davey Boy's career, I mean, if you're sitting down and watching this, by the end of this show, it just feels like Davey Boy Smith is the superstar among superstars. I mean, this is such a huge crowning moment. And yet we're watching this, and it seems like they already had the end date in mind, that this title is going to get shifted to Shawn. We're going to delay it a few months with Davey as the in-between. And you also look at this as like, maybe we just go full steam ahead with Davey Boy here, but are there enough concerns behind the scenes of putting all of that on Davey Boy? Because this is very much kind of a crossroads of his career, where it looks like his star has never been brighter in this company.
Oh, absolutely. And I think he hadn't been brighter, and he rose to the challenge of that, being a single star after the Bulldogs. Dynamite had apparently told him, "Oh, you'll never make it as a singles," and all that kind of stuff. And so there must have been levels of doubt. I think he was a deep thinking guy, probably had his own self-doubts, which probably ties into the things that we've just discussed. And he took the ball and ran with it, and we're doing an amazing job. I think that Shawn was probably going to be the next heel champion after Bret, was probably the plan. They saw this opportunity of SummerSlam, so right, we've got a ready-made main event, a ready-made result here. Let's give the ball to Davey to run with. It was only when subsequently, and it's all levels of irony and sliding doors moments, Flair has to drop the belt because it's already been decided that the WWF isn't a suitable home for him at that time. He is going to be going back to WCW. He did have the belt at the time. He has to drop it. Who's he got to drop it to? Oh, there's Bret. And then, so they didn't like to have the double babyface champion. They like to have a babyface and a heel combination. And so then it was, right, unfortunately, Davey, you're going to have to drop the belt. Let's pivot back to Shawn, I think was the thought process. They'd already got the next ready-made heel Intercontinental champion that they needed in Shawn. So it were a no-brainer at that point, but it did leave Davey. I mean, it wouldn't mean anything now. His reign was 59 days. That would be classed as a decent reign now. Back then it wasn't. The Intercontinental title was 13 years old, I think, at that point. And that 59 days was the second shortest reign. The shortest reign was the very much transitional champion stint of the Mountie between Bret and Piper and Bret,
right?
Which was a matter of days, which was the stereotypical transitional champion. Other than that, the 59 days of Davey was the shortest reign in the 13-year inception since the inception of the Intercontinental Championship. So I think David did feel shunned by that. He did feel a bit hurt by that, and felt like he probably had that step down the ladder. But as we said, as you alluded to a little bit earlier, that were going to be compounded by the fact that a matter of days later, it was actually out of the company. So his descent was almost as quick as his rise, I think.
So Davey Boy is fired in the fall, and you go into that in the book with the connection with the Ultimate Warrior story, and it does make you wonder that if that does not occur, what his 1993 looks like in WWF, because you have the possibility that with business so down in the US, and you're looking at Bret on top and Bulldog is like a secondary babyface, like your European business is in great shape with those two at your disposal. And it always makes me wonder what 1993 would have looked like for Davey Boy, regardless of him dropping the belt to Shawn, of what his follow-up is, because he's still, I think, benefiting greatly from that SummerSlam and just being more of a focus on the European markets at the time when business is down in the US.
Yeah, that the SummerSlam 92 main event can't be understated in terms of how I think Davey, and certainly Bret, I mean, Bret was so over anyway there, but particularly in Europe, as you say, like nobody can quite put the finger on how or why that happened. It was just a culmination of things that led to somehow Bret being the most over wrestler in the world in Europe at the time, apart from the UK, which was Davey, obviously. So you're absolutely right. Business down in the US at the time, a bit of that because of mainstream media coverage of certain things going on behind the scenes that hadn't quite transcended to the UK and Europe. So, and with Sky Sports still pumping it into us consciousness every single minute of every single day, it felt like business was booming here. So, yeah, I do think at some point, if it hadn't been for the Ultimate Warrior growth hormone controversy that led to Davey losing his job, I think David probably would have got a run with the belt over 93 and 94. And I think it'd have probably been a lot more leader of that new generation pack than he ended up being.
It's one of those great what ifs in terms as well of sort of just the long-term dependency that they saw in Davey Boy. Like it seemed even when he came back, it was like, we're fine to put him in a headlining position, but it just seemed like not that trust to make the guy at a time when, fewer got those opportunities as well. It wasn't like everyone just got their turn with the championship, but he just always seemed to be just below that grasp of being, Vince being all in on Davey Boy as his top babyface or heel.
Yeah, I think there's a few small things that play into that. Davey still, despite the size that he put on, obviously in a muscular way, was still, you can even see, when he's going face to face with Bret, Bret's classed as a smaller guy, but Bret's 6 foot, Davey's like 5'10", 5'10 and a half. So you can still, Vince at that point still wasn't quite ready to move on to the smaller guy. I don't think so, though. Maybe a little bit of that. Mm-hmm. And his mic skills never quite got over as well. I think his mic skills proved to be better when he were a heel. I think he preferred that he could sort of launch into a bit of a tirade a little bit. It didn't matter if it made sense. It didn't matter if, it was just a bit of a heel, angry tirade, and he could pull that off. I think to get the crowd fully behind him with a babyface promo was something it never felt natural. It never felt good. Never felt like it rolled off the tongue to him. Dynamite, you could always say the same about as well. I think, that's why they put Captain Lou Albano with them when they were a tag team because they were struggling on the mic. So I think there were a couple of little things there that played into that. Despite that, he still got over as much as anybody for a good period of months or even years. And then in his WCW run that followed, he performed amazingly there in that there was sort of a quartet going on, him and Sting on the babyface side against Vader and Sid. Some amazing matches, amazing performances against the likes of Regal as well. So yeah, his star was shining bright despite his some ongoing struggles behind the scenes, it seems.
Just wrapping up on the match from the Bret side of things, how do you go back and look at Bret's performance in terms of like some of his bigger matches? Because, he really was, he was in his element here, and you could see like just the walk down to the ring. He understands, like, he's playing subtle heel. It's not overt, but he understands what the role is here. And, this is a match that he credits among his very best, and believing that he was a large contributor to the reason it was as well received as it was.
Yeah, for me, not to gush too much, but for me, he is the greatest of all time. I think this match is part of the reason why, as you say, it sort of transcended the babyface heel stereotypes that there were. His popularity was just born out of him just being so good, like so entertaining. His matches so good, his promos solid, his look, everything about him. But then he knew the business so well that he knew exactly when he needed to play, as you've put it, the subtle heel. He knew that's what his role were on the night. So, but he knew that he couldn't, like the difference between the natural disasters, earthquake and typhoon, felt from overnight. They went from snarling, drooling heels that could kill your mother, it felt like, to smiling, thumbs up, cuddling your baby type baby faces. Bret treated the business with more respect than that. And so it was just extremely subtle things that he needed to do on the night just to elevate Davey and put himself more in that heel position for the night. And then obviously in 97, we saw him do that even more ingeniously, I felt, when he was, I think there's only him that could pull off things like the double turn with Austin at WrestleMania 13 and the being a babyface in various parts of the world, whilst also being a heel in various parts of the world. I think there's only Bret could pull all that off. So much respect for him as a performer, and I think sort of Davey owes a lot to him on the night, despite Davey's performance being amazing. There's little doubt that Bret was the water carrier, I think, on the night. And we weren't actually talking about this. I spoke to Bret on the phone, and he, despite he's had some, obviously over the years, he's had various criticisms of things that he's put in his books. He's so almost brutally honest.
Yes. That's a perfect description of Bret. Brutally honest.
Brutally honest. He's got so much integrity that he didn't, he just sort of transcends for him that, this is what happened. And I know, I know that at the time he sort of kept diaries and a bit of a dictaphone and that. So that's why his book is so long, so detailed and so accurate. It's because unlike most other wrestlers that try and do it all on this hazy memory that they had of things that happened 30 years ago, he'd got evidence and documentary type accounts from himself to fall back on. And it's so brilliant, his book, for all that. And he told me on the phone, he said that even Dave Meltzer every now and again refers to his book because he treats it almost as a bit of a gospel. And he also told me that, no matter what you've used my book for as research for yours, you can have every faith that it's right. And I just thought it's so great to hear that. He, I didn't think it could go up in the estimations anymore, but when he told me that, it certainly did. It's what you want to hear as a writer. That.
Just a few more questions here. I was just curious, sort of your recollections of when they go back to this match at the end of 95. It's on a In Your House pay-per-view, which obviously not the stage of this. It's probably not going to be in everyone's memory bank as readily available, but it's another, like, what I love about that other match is totally different from this one, where they have the use of blood, and it was, at that time period, a match that really stood out in a big way in late 95, where it's Davey in the heel role.
It is, and that is, for me, that had sort of been a little bit lost to time. It's an amazing match, but I think that because of SummerSlam 92 always overshadowing it, whenever you mention Bret and Bulldog in a singles match, people's consciousness just goes directly to SummerSlam 92 and the images that are burnt into your memory from that. But when you watch that, and as you said, there's a different dynamic because we've got a definitive heel in Davey in this one. But again, the only way that they could match the performance was to sort of roll back the years to the Stampede days and have the sort of match that they did then. So they tied in so many of the Stampede nuances that they were used to doing there, because they knew that was the only way that they could even attempt to make this match compete in people's memories in terms of how good it was with SummerSlam 92. So that's what brings on the blading job that Bret does, which, I mean, it's coming and you still rewind it and still can't see when he does it or how. It's just so surreptitious, and you can't even sort of blame that any camera work's involved because they had to do it. Even the organizers thought that it might be a hard way because it was so frowned upon at the time to blade, so they had to do it really secretively, and the cameras are on him all the time. He still manages to pull off this amazing blade job, but almost pulls it off too well because literally everything is covered in claret within seconds. But again, what you've got from that you might not have had otherwise is these images burned into your brain that you can't forget, and that's what I think the combination of Bret and Bulldog, it turns out all these years later, could do. We'll be talking about other matches that are happening now in 30 years' time, Probably not, but everybody's always going to talk about the two iconic singles matches that Bret and Davey had, because they managed to pull them off in a way that you can't forget them.
My last question is, when it comes to the on-screen legacy of Davey Boy Smith, how large is this match when it comes to the British Bulldogs career, that people are automatically going to go to SummerSlam 1992 when seeking a reference point for him?
I think it's everything, and it always has to be, but it's almost to the detriment of everything else. He had such an amazing career, 25-year career, so many highs. But this is just the definitive go-to moment, for everybody. Understandably so. How many British stars can say, we've packed out Wembley Stadium, 80,000 people, record sales of merchandise on the night, that iconic moment, and it did genuinely spawn what it did for British wrestling in so many ways for years going forward. But it's almost unfair on the rest of his career that it's so definitively remembered. It is so definitively remembered by that one event. The match with Owen for the European title.
Yeah.
As we've discussed, the other match with Bret, is run in WCW when he was a bona fide main eventer there. And you could go on and on. Obviously, the British Bulldogs, his time in Japan, his time in Stampede, everything he accomplished, the ground that he broke. I think the way you've got to look at it is that it's an extra compliment to this match and to this event, that it overshadows everything else. It's just almost the cherry on the cake, as we say.
And most of all, the fan at the beginning of the broadcast was right. British Bulldog's going to win whether he wants to or not.
He did win whether he wanted or not.
A very famous moment from SummerSlam 1992. And I would encourage everyone, if you've enjoyed this chat with Steven, I really emphasize you go check out Dynamite and Davey, The Explosive Lives of the British Bulldogs. This is just a slice of the book, was looking at the lead up and fallout of SummerSlam 1992. 1992, it's a very tumultuous year for Davey Boy Smith, but the entire life and career of himself and Tom Billington covered in that book. And where's the best place for people to go check out the book, Steven, and anything else you'd like to mention for our listeners?
Yeah, I think unlike the last time we spoke, it's actually just readily available worldwide now. The easiest place, unfortunately, the easiest place for everybody to get it is Amazon. So we'll have to all sort of line Jeff Bezos' pockets a little bit there, because it just is, especially with sort of post-pandemic and everything like that, other things taken into account. I'm over here on the little island of the UK. Anywhere else struggles to sort of have the shipping capability of Amazon, I think. So yeah, worldwide, you are best off resorting to Amazon, but you can get it in other bookstores. You can also contact myself on Twitter for signed copies. I'm available at Stephen_Bell1985. The book has a dedicated Twitter page, which I post some exclusive stuff out on there, pictures that didn't quite make the cut and one or two things like that, some outtakes. That's at Bulldogs Book 123. And so, yeah, I'm available. DMs are open on them if you want to get in touch with me for, as I say, ask me anything about the book, how I went about it, or if you want to buy a signed copy that I'll post out personally. Yeah, happy to oblige.
Well, Steven, it was great to chat with you and chatting about SummerSlam 30 years later. And congratulations again. I said it before on the book. I really think the research is incredible, and the stories that you uncovered, the people that you spoke to me, it really is the definitive history of the British Bulldogs. So I would definitely recommend people.
Thanks a lot, John. And your feedback amongst some others, it's sort of the likes of yourself. It means that extra little bit coming from the likes of yourself. And so, yeah, when the reprint's happening, your little blurb that you kindly sent is going to be printed on there. So it means a lot. Thank you.
And that's going to wrap it up. Thanks to everybody for checking out this interview. And for more, you can go check out postwrestling.com and check out Dynamite and Davey, The Explosive Lives of the British Bulldog.